Hello, and welcome to the Bloodstream Podcast, a show serving the greater bleeding disorders community, brought to you by Believe Limited and Bloodstream Media, made possible thanks to our presenting sponsor, Takeda. I am your patient advocate and host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I am your healthcare advocate, nonprofit nerd, and your other host, Amy Bradford, reminding you to please speak with a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions.
On today's show, we have Dr. Ben Samelson-Jones on to talk to us about advances in gene therapy for Hemophilia B. We're also going to talk about Star Therapeutics. It's a new biotech. You may have heard us mention it before, that is focused on VWD and has brought aboard someone that might be familiar to a number of members of this audience. And I'm excited to hear more about this. Hope you are too. We'll tell you all about it and more coming up on this episode. Welcome to Bloodstream.
Listeners, as always, thank you for joining us today. And if you like what you hear, please share with your family and friends and subscribe to the Bloodstream Podcast so you can get this thing whenever we drop on all your devices. It's like a whole thing.
It really is, and participation is mandatory. I also want to remind you, dear listeners, that the Bloodstream Podcast is indeed made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Yes,
Takeda.
Right. Takeda. Takeda's got this website, bleedingdisorders.com, where you can learn all about Takeda's resources for and commitment to the bleeding disorders community. Takeda believes in a world free of bleeds, Amy Bradford. And they are dedicated more than ever in their efforts to offer a wide range of programs and support to help patients throughout their treatment journey, wherever on that journey they may be. And you can learn more by simply visiting bleedingdisorders.com. One more time, just because. bleedingdisorders.com. And for their founding and ongoing support of the Bloodstream Podcast, I would just like to say thanks, Takeda.
Thank you, Takeda.
So Bradford, you had a trip. You were working on one of our films, the Women with Hemophilia Project, took you to Columbus just recently. And selfishly, I'd love to hear about that.
Well, first of all, it's Columbus, Ohio is in the middle of that cold snap, and it was not warm. Like, I can't begin to stress.
Did you not know that en route? Were you prepared for Miami or?
No, fair. No, us people that live in LA go soft so quickly. I mean, we lose the ability to be in cold environments real quick. So we knew it was going to be cold. We bundled up. We brought long underwear. We did the thing, and it still is so cold. The wind is so bitingly cold. But it was awesome. We were there all weekend. I have to give a shout out to our Ohio bleeding disorder community. I was able to go to, they had an advocacy ambassador training with Randy Kleitz and Lisa Ratterman at the Ohio Advocacy Association. And it was so fun to see them, working like in the moment. It was so fun to see them. And then our sweet subject, she's 15. She has moderate hemophilia, bleeds like a severe, was so well spoken. And it was just a joy. It was really a joy to like hang with her family all weekend. So it was, as always, one of my favorite parts about this job is being able to, kind of see y'all in your elements. So it was really great. It was really cool.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah.
Were you able to get some stuff with Randy and others as well for the film?
A little bit. Yeah, we got her speaking a little bit. We didn't get any interviews with her in particular, but she wasn't on our list. If you know.
No, but even if there's some B-roll, interesting to think about, given her affiliation with the community. For those who don't know, Randy has now also been a state representative. So when we talk about advocacy and people who understand it from different points of view, Randy's an example of a woman in the hemophilia community who's done a lot of great things in the advocacy world, both on the nonprofit advocate side and now as a represented elected official, which is very, very cool.
We did get her, we filmed her, Randy, doing a tour of the State House in Iowa for our subject and our thing. So that was awesome. And a very cool, just to like reiterate and to go here on what Patrick said, Randy's story is cool. If you don't know Randy's story, I mean, she started as a mom, had a very difficult experience when she gave birth to her son and was petrified of public speaking, hates public speaking. And now she has served as a representative for Ohio. It's like really cool story.
Yeah, let's get her
really
on
cool story.
Sometime in the near future. Let's make a note
she
to get
would
Randy
hate
on.
it. She would love it, but she would hate it.
Bottom line is she will do it. Sorry, Randy, not to voluntold you, but come on the podcast.
That's
Hey, we
awesome.
got
No, that's
Washington
awesome.
Days coming up before too long. We're in this,
Yep.
we just got a new administration in. It's a good time to
Yep.
bring in somebody like Randy. So, Randy, can't say no.
100%. Can't say no.
Speaking of superstars, who is it that Star Therapeutics has brought onto their team, and why is that important, Amy Board? Why is this a bullet in today's rundown?
Well, so this was, I saw this today. I don't know if this was announced earlier, but I saw it today and I flagged it for y'all because I thought it was really interesting. Those of you who have been in the community for a while and know some of the ins and outs of very exciting and anticipatory programs and drug pipelines that are coming out in the bleeding disorders community all tend to hire the same person in terms of their commercial community success. And she's a good friend, love her to death. Jessica Swan was hired by Star Therapeutics to head their global commercial strategy, specifically in bleeding disorders. And I was so excited because Jess has done... I mean, she's really worked in the creme de la creme in terms of commercial entrance into bleeding disorder. She worked for Biogen for a long time. She's worked at Roche, Genentech for a long time. So to have her go over to Star Therapeutics, who have a monoclonal antibody for VWD in the pipeline, is very, very exciting. And I think we've talked about this before, but just wanted to keep an eye on it. It's not in phase 3 trials by any stretch of the imagination, so I don't know if clinical trials are actually happening in clinics. However, they do on their website have a little button that says if you want more information about enrolling in clinical trials, reach out to them. So if you're interested, if you have VWD and you want more interest, please go to their website, which is star-therapeutics.com. So the Vega program here, they are in development for a drug that targets protein S. Protein S is a key component in restoring balance to the blood clotting process. I am reading this from their website, just FYI. This helps balance the coagulation components needed to promote blood clotting in people living with BWD, which is really exciting and kind of mirrors, I think, some of the work that's happening in Hemophilia A and Hemophilia B in terms of these sub-Q options that are targeting different places of our clotting system rather than just replacing that factor, really targeting some other proteins and cofactors in our body to kind of restore that balance. So
Well said.
VWD folks, what a vibe, right?
No kidding. So it's amazing to see the progress that Star is making with Vega. And then to your point, Amy, when you see someone like Jess hired in this global commercial position, it's a real indication that they are encouraged by their data and ramping up to make a big splash within the bleeding disorder space. It's a ways away. It's not going to be this week, this month, this quarter, or this year. But clinical trials, if you are interested in that, to Amy's point, go to their website for more on that. There may be opportunities to enroll if this is something that's of interest to you or a loved one. And for the rest of us, this will probably be something we continue to report on as there's information about phase 2, phase 3, submissions to the FDA, those different milestones that come along the way. And, let's just keep identifying future guests. Let's get Jess on the podcast too. I don't think we've had her on the podcast before, but we've known her for a very long time. It would be great to catch up. And I'd love to hear about what she's learning as somebody who's been so heme focused in her professional career, but has known this community and worked in a nonprofit capacity for this community, holistically. It's cool to see this professional focus. Would love to hear more about it.
Done.
So there we
DUN done. That's awesome.
DUN.
Patrick, I have a question for you. If you were a patient or caregiver that has interest in this, how would you follow along of what Star Therapeutics is doing? How would you follow along at home?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, Google Alerts is, kind of one simple mechanistic way to just tell Google, hey, when you see Star Therapeutics, and if there's certain keywords that you're looking for, study readout or phase 1 or now enrolling, you can kind of cue it that way. We will try to make sure that anything that is of a particular level of meaningful progress that we make note of here on Bloodstream. But Amy, you're speaking to something that's a little bit of a pain point because, and this is not throwing any of the nonprofit organizations or media entities that exist currently under the bus, But I do think it's challenging if you're a newly diagnosed person or your child's been recently diagnosed. Where is just the one-stop shop that I can go that will bring me to wherever I need without having to know about 12 different organizations and all these different websites and all these different programs? I can appreciate how it would be overwhelming. So I wish there was a better answer to that. I don't think there is. It's something that we talk about trying to solve for a bit internally, but I would say in short, those Google alerts are the equivalent, is a nice mechanistic way to make sure you know about stuff as it happens. And then if there is anything of particular note, we'll shout it out here. But you know what? If we have Jess on the podcast too, she may be able to tell us more specifics about, hey, we have a communications program. If people want to opt in to updates, like she may be able to provide even more. And VWD hasn't had much, so I would not be surprised if there's a fair number of people who are really hungry for more. So we'll see. And if so, let us know. We'll try to help, be as useful as we can as this drug development story continues.
Cool. Exciting.
Speaking of drug development, so we had an interview with Ben Samelson-Jones, Dr. Ben Samelson-Jones. He's been on, I think, Bloodstream before, Global Hemophilia Reports, certainly. And the reason that we decided to speak with him is he was recently showcased in a few places for validating, the safety and efficacy profile of Becvez, which is the Pfizer product for the Pfizer gene therapy product for people with hemophilia B. Part of the reason, and actually there's a quote from Ben that I liked. So Ben shared this during the American Society of Hematology's annual meeting at the end of last year. Quote, "It should be very reassuring that there's nothing unexpected. I think the story of AAV-based gene therapy for hemophilia over the last 3 decades has been surprises. And I think what this should be reassuring that there's nothing that's popped up that is of concern." And he went on to say, "I think there's been a potential misconception that using a metric of other new drugs, how rapidly the uptake is, and I don't think it's a good comparison just because of the logistics of getting everything in place to do this totally new type of medication." And not to put words in the good doctor's mouth, but I think the inference there is that Roctavian, the BioMarin commercially available product for people with hemophilia A, has a much different safety efficacy profile than Becvez, than Hemgenix, which is CSL Behring's product for gene therapy for hemophilia B. So we have mentioned this, in my opinion, ad nauseum, and probably will continue to for a long time. There is a massive difference between the commercially available gene therapy for hemophilia A and gene therapy for hemophilia B, of which there are 2 products. Massive difference between A and B. And that is why Ben is out there speaking, because the A product has gotten a lot more attention. Hemophilia A is the larger population size for a number of reasons are not terribly important. His point is that to some degree, along with an underappreciation of what it means to stand up this entirely new type of medication, administration, and follow-on system, there's some need for clarification. So that's what Ben is attempting to provide, and that's why we asked him to come on, answer a few questions from us to just bring even greater clarity to the safety and efficacy profile of the products available in hemophilia B versus hemophilia A, and hopefully you find it somewhat informative.
Bloodstream listeners, it's Keith Cornelick, producer of the podcast, sitting in the captain's chair for Patrick, who's out sick today. And with Amy on jury duty, we took a long look across the office and decided it was my time to be behind the microphone. And today we have Dr. Ben Samelson-Jones. He's assistant professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. He's also associate director of clinical in vivo gene therapy and attending physician division of hematology. Quite a resume, quite a mouthful. Ben, welcome to Bloodstream.
Thanks, Keith, and I hope Patrick feels better soon and jury duty is not too arduous.
Yeah, me too, because I can't host this show by myself, let me tell you. Well, let's get into it. Ben, what's the biggest takeaway from the safety and effectiveness profile of Becvez for hemophilia B?
So I think the biggest takeaway is that most recipients with BECVEZ have sustained factor IX activity levels in the mild hemophilia range, so greater than 5% normal. And this results in a substantial decrease in the bleeding rates, even from standard of care prophylaxis with factor IX concentrates, and improvements in quality of life metrics. Safety wise, BECVEZ is pretty well tolerated. No recipients in the clinical trials had infusion reactions, blood clots, factor IX inhibitors, or malignancies. About 20% in the phase 1 study and 60% of recipients in the phase 3 clinical trials were treated with corticosteroids, which have a well-described safety effect profile. And 2 recipients did have bleeding GI ulcers while on steroids, while the steroids were being administered, and these 2 recipients did not receive GI prophylaxis. And I think that's a good lesson for any treaters out there, and that's certainly my practice would be to combine steroids with GI prophylaxis. And I'll tell you, as an investigator in the phase 1 study, anecdotally, many of these participants that I follow continue to describe how this therapy has been life-changing for them. And I get emails from them not infrequently telling them all the new things that they're able to do because their severe hemophilia has been treated with gene therapy.
That's terrific. And how long do the benefits of gene therapy last?
So I would be really careful to say we don't know the answer to that question. We have highly encouraging results from this phase 1 study for BECVEZ that these factor IX levels are relatively stable for at least 6 years. And there is long-term data from an earlier gene therapy trial for hemophilia B using wild-type factor IX, which is in contrast to the factor IX Padua variant used in BECVEZ, that the levels are very stable for at least 10 years. And I would predict similar durability for BECVEZ, but this really remains to be proven.
What are the main concerns with immune responses to gene therapy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I think immune responses are really the major side effect of current adeno-associated viral vectors, AAV gene therapy, which BECVEZ is one of several examples of. And there are at least 4 immune responses I think that are worth mentioning. So first and foremost, because the vector on the outside looks like the immune system to the virus, on the inside it's very different. It can't replicate. It's not a virus. But on the outside, it looks like a virus. The immune system, after vector administration, makes large amounts of antibodies against the vector. And we don't think that specifically has negative impacts on the efficacy of the gene therapy. But what it does do is prevent the recipient, the person that got the gene therapy, from receiving additional doses of AAV-based gene therapy. And this is a really important limitation because it means you only get one chance at AAV gene therapy. And so when I counsel patients, either a clinical trial or someone interested in a licensed vector, I always emphasize that this is the most predictable risk of this type of treatment. The second immune response is really a theoretical concern that to make an antibody against the new factor IX. This has never happened, fortunately, for any hemophilia B gene therapy recipient, but it's something that we always monitor for. The third are infusion reactions, right? So during or closely associated with the vector administration. And this has occurred with other AAV vectors, but actually we did not observe it for BECVEZ. And then the fourth immune response is the cellular immune response against the outside of the vector. This happens about 3 to 12 weeks after vector administration. And if it's not controlled, it can result in a loss of the factor IX levels. And this immune response is treated with immune suppression with corticosteroids, which I mentioned in the previous question. And that was used in about 60% of the recipients of BECVEZ in the phase 3 study.
Thank you. How do you help patients understand gene therapy and make informed choices?
So first, foremost, I acknowledge this is a really big step. And it's also a different type of therapeutic decision because of its one-time nature than previous therapeutic decisions that people may have encountered earlier. And I make the analogy sometimes that like the most therapy decisions are kind of like dating. You can try something on, see if it works for you, see if it makes sense. But if it doesn't work, if it's not the right fit, you can move on. Gene therapy is kind of like an arranged marriage. There are unknowns, and you're going to have to live with the outcomes for the foreseeable future for that particular product. The other point I think is really important to convey, both for Beckfez and all the current gene therapies for hemophilia, is that the results are variable. Often the average factor levels are reported, but I think it's really important to convey the full spectrum of what possible outcomes are, and not just to rely on differences in average levels. And so I provide, we do both written and verbal counseling in preparation for gene therapy. My practice has basically been to meet with potential recipients and whatever family members or who helped them make the decisions, usually at least 3 times. A couple of those can be virtually. And then I like to do teach back in the latter meetings where I say, okay, explain to this person that you brought to help you how you make the decision what you see the risk and benefits of this type of approach are, and then I get to see how well I'm conveying the information. And gene therapy is really complicated. It's not like any treatment that people have done, and it's not like in med school or in hematology fellowship we have a course on gene therapy. This is all things that we've learned by doing these clinical trials and moving the field ahead. So I think it's really important that the providers understand the nuances and that we are able to effectively convey it to people interested in gene therapy. And making sure that's the case, I think, is really important.
And now, why is it important to track patients after they receive gene therapy?
Yeah, so as mentioned, gene therapy is new for hemophilia, but it's new for medicine in general. And these long-term outcomes, we don't know because no one's had gene therapy for that long. And the only way we're going to answer these unknowns is with robust following of both clinical trial patients long-term. And so, I mentioned a couple times my participation in the phase 1, and we are going to follow those patients out for 15 years. And I acknowledge the sponsor for supporting that in that time frame. But patients with licensed vectors, we need to follow as well to answer these questions. And so we participate in the World Federation Registry, and we also have actually a local registry of not just gene therapy for hemophilia, but any person at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia gets gene therapy. We are trying to follow them as well.
What should doctors keep in mind when considering gene therapy for one of their patients with hemophilia?
So I think it's really important to try to understand what that person with hemophilia is looking for the gene therapy, and to make sure that those expectations, like what are the likelihood that those expectations could be met. I don't think gene therapy is for everyone, but I think as I mentioned, I think it can be life-changing when it's successful. And then as I alluded to also, I think it's really important. I think that we educate ourselves to the technology and the nuances of the clinical trials so we can really help our patients make sure they're making the right decision for themselves.
So a key question I've always had is, what's stopping more people from getting gene therapy for hemophilia B?
Yeah, I don't think you're the only one that has that question. I think, the uptake for the Hem B products, both Beckfez and Hemgenic, I think have been slower than some people anticipated. But a big part of this is this is sort of a theme of this conversation. This therapy is different than any other therapies that we do for hemophilia. And it's different in the biology, but it's different in the institutional processes that need to sort of be brought on board to do this. So at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, we've been doing clinical trials for gene therapy for 20 years. And it still took us over a year of working through all the processes and committees to be allowed to do a licensed vector. It's one of the few cases where I've had my interactions with insurance companies to be the least prolonged part of the process. And part of this is when something costs several $1,000,000, everybody wants to make sure it's done perfectly right the first time. So for example, when the vector was delivered was a big discussion point because the institution didn't want to be storing it over the weekend in our freezers if something happened. And, they would prefer it be delivered 35 minutes before it was infused into the patient. So I think that has been. I think some smaller centers have been able to be more nimble. That's the nature of a big enterprise. There's a lot of processes and systems that have to be corralled to get something done. But I also think it's very tractable, and I think I'm optimistic that you're going to see more and more centers and more people with hemophilia find centers that can administer gene therapy. Because, as I said, I think many patients will really benefit from this therapy. And as those people, those recipients talk to other people are going to want this. And the other side is I think the consent process should not be rushed, right? So this is not something that you have a routine comprehensive visit on Monday and then you're getting administered the next week. You need to go through, get a lot of information. You need to talk to people. You need to make sure this is the right thing for you.
And what's next for gene therapy and hemophilia treatment?
Yeah, so I think we've sort of talked mostly about hemophilia B, but I think some of the most exciting new gene therapy strategies are for hemophilia A, where, admittedly, I think the first generation vectors for hemophilia A have been somewhat disappointing compared to hemophilia B. But now there's a number of what I would call second generation approaches, new factor VIII variants being used that I think can hopefully address some of these limitations. And then the other thing is what we've been talking about is what could be considered gene transfer. The missing factor VIII or factor IX gene is transferred to the recipient's cells where it sits next to but not integrated into the recipient's own genes. And one of the potential downsides is if the liver grows or divides, the gene therapy gene won't go with the new cells. And one way to get around this is do gene editing, where the gene is specifically inserted into the recipient's genome. And this has the potential to allow treatment of much younger people with hemophilia, children, if the safety issues can be worked out first. And I think gene therapy can be life-changing for adults, but not having to ever to do factor prophylaxis, I think would be the ultimate therapy. So that and those are in late stage preclinical, and I think we're about to start one gene editing trial for hemophilia B in the near future.
It's fascinating and well said. How do gene therapies for hemophilia compare to other gene therapies?
Yeah, so hemophilia has really been on the forefront of gene therapy, especially AAV-based gene therapy for almost these 20 years. There are now 6 approved AAV gene therapy drugs in the United States. 3 of them are for hemophilia, but then 3 of them for other rare diseases. I think one difference is that the factor level, factor VIII or factor IX, we know is like an excellent biomarker for clinical outcomes. And so we know very quickly how well we think this gene therapy is going to do, because we know based on the natural history of hemophilia what that factor level means. I think the other gene therapies, it's a little harder to understand how efficacious it is and how long it's going to last because they can't track these as closely. The other difference is I think hemophilia, we have other therapies, and for some of the congenital blindness or the other neurological diseases, those disease communities don't have other treatments. And so their uptake is much higher because that's all there is. But I think we learn a lot from those other disease communities, especially with some of the toxicities, how long things are going to last, how to manage toxicities. And so I think it's really important that people doing hemophilia gene therapy are talking to their colleagues who are doing gene therapy for neurological disorders, so everyone gets the best therapy.
Excellent. And finally, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to speak to as it relates to gene therapy for Hem A or Hem B?
I don't know if we haven't talked to, but I would emphasize really the importance of fully understanding the technology as well as the nuance is in the clinical trials, both for my colleagues and any people with hemophilia that are interested in this type of therapy. I think this has great potential and can be a really life-changing journey, but it's important that it starts with good information.
That's great. Dr. Ben Samelson-Jones, thank you so much for being on Bloodstream, making my job very easy. And back to Patrick and Amy in the studio. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben Samelson-Jones, for coming on the program, talking some Heme B gene therapy, Heme A gene therapy in general. Oh boy, I said that a whole lot of times there. Thanks as well to our presenting sponsor, Takeda. As always, we could not do this without you, and we are grateful for it.
We should mention that that interview was conducted by Keith Corneluk, who is our producer.
Shouts out to Keith Corneluk.
Listeners, this is the first time you've heard Keith's voice. We talk about him all the time.
Knowingly. I think it has slipped in there in trailers and segments in the past in an
that's
unannounced
true.
way, but we're not letting it slip by. That was Keith. Never forget it.
And I'm sure everybody who listened to that interview was blown away like, who is that interviewer and why is he so talented?
Mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com. All right, Bradford O.
Okay.
Next episode, Feb 7th. Can you? We're already eclipsing the first month of the new year. It always happens so fast.
February. It's insane.
Anyway, what can listeners expect to hear?
We have a cool guest next episode on February 7th. Corbin Whittington is an executive coach, and he's on numerous boards of directors. He lives with a chronic disease.
CIDP. We don't try to say all those big words in there, but it is acronym. The acronym is CIDP.
But you actually were the one that heard him. He did a keynote, and you were really drawn to him. And how cool to get him on the podcast.
Yeah, he is a very inspirational individual and was diagnosed late in life with a rare disease. So this is not something that he was born with and lived his whole life with. His is a story where midway through his life, he's thrown this enormous curveball that basically gave him a very slim chance of survival, quite frankly. His story is remarkable, and I heard him tell it. And as a fellow patient advocate seeking to use my skills, network, and abilities to bring about change, I felt a kinship to Corbin immediately. So I asked him if he would be willing to come on, share a bit of his story with the Bloodstream podcast audience. And frankly, I hope we're doing more too to shine a light on the plasma-based therapies that exist within, yes, the bleeding disorders space, but beyond too. You know, there's a lot to be said about that. This isn't the time for it, but that's in part why we're having Corbin on. So hope you enjoyed that. That'll be on the next episode coming out on Feb 7.
Cool.
And with that, that is all for this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Bloodstream podcast if somehow you haven't already. It's a 2025 New Year's resolution to have that next episode delivered to you the moment it goes live.
And as always, just like Patrick mentioned, mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com is where you can send all of your inquiries about casting, all of the things, feedback on Keith Corneluk's performance, feedback on our performance.
Mostly Keith's,
Mostly Keith's, though. We'd love to get feedback. That'd be great. And also, you can find us on social media, Bloodstream Media, and then Patrick and I, obviously, feel free to reach out, let us know, drop a line.
I am your host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm your other host, Amy Bradford.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.